What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the altar again, and this time we return with Emma of Sick Puppies. Great to be able to talk with you since Louder Than Live. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we'll have a little bit more than 2.5 minutes,
Right.
other than last time. But this new album, Wave the Bull, I'm very excited for the rest of the world to hear this album. It's an absolutely awesome record. I know it's kind of like a frowned upon question to ask, what does the record name mean? But when I hear the terminology "wave the bull," it almost has sort of like an expression aspect behind it, like break a leg or knock him dead or something like that. Is there sort of like a significance? Is like the bull almost like a metaphor for something in a way?
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, it does have a meaning. It was kind of a play on that term "take the bull by the horns" kind of thing. But we were kind of like, we don't really want to obviously use that, but we were playing around with just the concept of the bull and the way of the bull, and then we're like, oh, wave the bull, and then we sort of thought about it and we mulled it over, and it basically means like bringing on adversity without being afraid of it, because usually when you're trying to like avoid adversity, you're not really into it, you're afraid of it, you know you're trying to run away from it, and I guess it's just sort of like it's inevitable, so may as well just wave the ball, bring it on, and just take what comes, kind of thing.
Yeah, like you almost just have to go into it regardless if it's going to hurt you or not.
Right.
And do you feel that
Yeah.
you, as an artist, like every artist has to wave the bull at some point, whether looking inward to evolve as an artist, or working in an industry where there's a lot of other hands involved. So, was this more or less like your personal experiences as an artist, sort of being incorporated into the meaning?
Probably everything, like everything above, just everything in life, and then everything in also the industry, the things that happen, like just the things that they don't tell you about. Like, I don't know, it's just but also this was also coined after the pandemic as well, because we kind of had a few songs 2019, and then pandemic happened, and then like it was just sort of like a process there of, because that was like difficult for everyone, and for many different reasons, and some worse than others, and that sort of brought on a whole new meaning of adversity, because it's like I don't think we've ever collectively ever gone through anything like that together as a global thing. It's usually just localized to you or your family or your group or whatever. But yeah, it was kind of a eye-opening experience, at least for us. And we were sort of just thinking about it, and then we were thinking about our own like trials and tribulations and stuff like that. So it's just that, yeah, it just encompasses everything.
Is there, like, because this is a big gap that you've had between albums?
Yeah,
It's been almost a decade since Fury came out.
yeah,
So
yeah.
was maybe the initial idea to just sort of make a continuation, or just the standard follow up to Fury, and then sort of your ideas changed as a result of the pandemic and everything happened, or were you kind of like just sticking with the same initial idea that you wanted to follow up with Fury, and it just kind of turned out that way?
I think it was, yeah, it is definitely a long time. There was like a long touring cycle with Fury, and then it was just sort of label stuff that happened. And then it was, yeah, well, what we wanted to do was not just a standard follow up, but I think because Fury was so, it wasn't rushed because it was good the way that happened. We got Brian, and then we just immediately did a new album and went with it. And it was kind of like, well, because you know how when something happens, you don't really have time to process it. You just sort of roll with it, and before you know it, you're doing it and you're done and you're past it. And so I think we wanted to take our time with it, and I think in doing so, we were like, oh, let's experiment a little more, with style and what we're really about. That kind of, I don't want to say backfired, but I think it was a good thing in the end, because we sort of branched out pretty far into some territories where we spent a lot of time on it, and then we were like, I don't think this is us at all, and it just took a lot of time, of writing and sort of realizing that, and so we kind of scrapped a lot of stuff, and then kind of, that's when we kind of found again like who the band really was. And there's a lot of songs on the album that to me just feel like old school Sick Puppy songs, in a new way.
Yeah.
It's always going to be different, but yeah, so it was all of that combined, I guess.
I mean, as a fan of your work, this could just be me being a fan, but like when you compare Welcome to the Real World to Tripolar, or you compare like Dress Up as Life to Connect, it seems like every album does have its sort of distinctions behind it, those things that make, it stand out, which is what I think is so miraculous about Sick Puppies. You have your own signature sound, but you also are able to sort of experiment and sort of step into uncharted territory. Do you enter your songwriting process with a preconceived vision in a way, or is it a very like throwing paint at the wall and sort of seeing what sticks songwriting process?
I think the mistake we may have made when we did that first initial round was having a preconceived notion, because that's when you start to put things in boxes and you're like, oh, we can't do that, but we can do this and that. And then it's not really what it's about. You sort of just want to, be. And then I think once we threw that out and, like you said, threw paint in the wall and see what stuck, that's kind of more the ideology that we probably went with towards the end. But in doing that also, it's we sort of landed upon ourselves anyway. So, which was lucky, because it was like you're naturally drawn to what you want to do. So that eventually came out.
Yeah. Do you because when it comes to being a bassist, it has such an emphasis on rhythm and melody at the same time, and also being very involved with the vocals as well. There's so many different elements you're focusing on at once. So do you have like a thing that you always have to start off with? Do you need like rhythm laid down first before you know how you're incorporating bass parts? Or do you maybe have like a whole song written on the bass and then you would write over that and so on?
No, I don't think there needs to be. I mean, yeah, but you're right, though. I really do. Me personally, I really love just the rhythmic side of things. I think the band as a whole kind of likes that too. So we definitely lean heavily on that. Like there'll be like a riff or something, or say there'll be like a chorus or something. We'll try to incorporate something just naturally rhythmic with it within the riff, rather than straight chords and straight strumming, which is fine as well. But sometimes we like to like spice it up a little bit. But it can be anything. It could be bass riff or like even a concept, and then we could just like write from a concept or a chorus, and it could come from anywhere.
I was about to ask, do lyrics maybe help determine like the outcome of the music in and of itself? Does the concept maybe guide your hand with regards to how a song is gonna be laid out?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Because, usually a lot of times as well, we'll be listening to stuff and be influenced by stuff, like, oh, it was cool how this song does this. And, there's a lot of that, of course, because that's part of, I guess, music and art. And they'll be like, oh, there's this type of song where we wanted to, and there'll be like a vague outline maybe of that, and that will govern, how that song sounds maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost cliche because this is like the song, but "Odd One" is like such a.
Oh yeah.
It resonates with so many people, but the thing that I think makes it sound so good, look, telling people to be themselves and that don't that has been a concept that's been expressed. I've heard it in Disturbed songs and Five Finger Death Punch songs. There's a very famous Pantera song that I could go the rest of my life without hearing that tells people to be themselves all the time, but I can't hear that concept anymore without it resorting to a sound like Odd One. You know what I mean? I feel like that there's like a sensitivity aspect behind it that makes it seem more real. Sure, there's plenty of punk rock and rock that tells people to be themselves all the time, but that's one of the easiest calling cards art ever has to offer. So I feel like there is a sense of genuine when you do make a message like that,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. It has to come from that one. I mean, as the other ones do as well, it came from just a story it was a genuine, a period in time for us at the time. It was just like, the story, but yeah, so we drew from like childhood experiences and, yeah, it has to be some sort of authenticity to it, I would imagine.
Yeah. Do you, because I remember being so intrigued to hear a song like that, but then also have You're Going Down on the same record, which has a lot of attitude. Right. It's almost a song that's like it's literally like written at something. There is a sense of spite within it. So there's a lot of emotions that are felt throughout Sick Puppies, some that are very uplifting, some that are pessimistic. But if you're working on something for a very long time, and do you find it maybe more difficult to maintain that emotion, to maintain that initial spark of the idea?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think that's kind of what happened to us at the beginning of the process. It's sort of like we we got a little lost in the process. We were like, yeah, I don't know, and then it's difficult because I felt like we kind of had a little bit of pressure because it was like, okay, so what are we going to do now, kind of thing. And I think we sort of you just go through the process and you go through maybe what doesn't work, and like, I don't think doesn't feel good, doesn't feel right, and then you happen upon something that is very much you as a band, and then you just go from there and go, okay, so we'll just draw from that space, kind of thing. But yeah, if you're over and over again trying to write something about something, and it's not, and you're writing it but it's not really happening, it does feel like, like beating a dead horse a little bit. But and then sometimes it comes really easily.
Do you express yourself as a bassist the same way you would as a vocalist in a way? Do you use both instruments to express who Emma and who Sick Puppies is, or is there maybe one instrument that could express a side of yourself that you couldn't with the otherwise, and other one, and vice versa?
That's a cool question. And it's funny. I always, even as a kid, like I didn't really vote, like I never really wanted to be like a singer or anything like that. And I really gravitated towards instruments and bass in particular because of the fact that it's rhythmic, and also you can be really melodic on it as well. So it kind of acted as like a voice, and it still does. And I'm not like, if I was a singer, then that would just be my voice. But for me, it is definitely bass. I really love drums too. I think I love the rhythmic aspect of music. I think it's really powerful, and it's got nothing to do with vocals or anything like that. But I still feel like you are expressing yourself in a very like primal way. Just like I feel like vocals are very primal because it's your vocal cords and you're screaming or you're singing and emoting. But then I think rhythm does the same thing.
Do you does it maybe, especially with Sick Puppies, do you feel that because there is nobody else playing bass, but you and Brian are working together on the vocals, and I know that Mark brings some backup vocals as well into it. So do you think that maybe like the bass is almost like, this is mine, and the vocals is sort of like shared with everybody?
I mean, do you mean like other play? Like, what do you mean?
You don't have to
Others
share.
play the
You don't
instrument?
have to share bass tracks, but you have to share
Gotcha,
vocal
gotcha.
tracks.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's nice to have something that is yours to have to express yourself through. It kind of reminded me when you saying that, I was like, my mind went to two bass players, and I actually was inspired by a band that had two bass players, funnily enough. It was a long time ago back in Australia. They were called Pre-Shrunk, and they had two bass players and a drummer, and they sang too, but one of the bass players like kind of held down the rhythm and that kind of stuff, and the other bass player had a bunch of pedals and was, expressing through effects and melody and stuff. So that's funny. Anyway.
Yeah, people would say all these terrible bass player jokes in rock and roll, but in reality, there is so much you can do with the bass in and of itself. There's electric bass, there's upright bass. There's an instrumental band I follow where they use an 8-string bass. There's a lot you could do with it that like bring melodies. I'm obsessed with this death metal band called Archspire, and they're doing like hammer-ons on the bass, and he's literally playing the bass like it's a guitar. So there's so much that could be done with it.
Absolutely, I agree, and I can totally see why back in the day. I mean, not even back in the day, even now, I guess. The sheer fact that there's 4 strings versus 6, I'm sure I've heard a lot of people say that. Well, there's only, it's kind of stupid, but then when you really look into it and you really play it and you see the history and the players and what it does and how it serves the song, it's like, oh, there's just so much more to it. And I got attracted to it just because of the dual aspect of the rhythm and the melody. Yeah. You can do that with guitar, sure. There's a lot of people that do like that popping technique and stuff. What do you call it? The thump technique on guitar, even back then. But it's just, I don't know, I prefer it on bass.
Well, first off, if you could say so much with just 4 strings and don't need that extra 2, that's a talent in itself. No offense, guitar players, but and FYI, there could be 6 strings on the bass because some of those strings are very thick. They're just combined together.
Yes,
so
that's right. I forget now. It's like 5, 6, 7 string basses. And people do really well with those.
Yeah. Um, and being, I'm curious too, being that you all have contribute vocally and of itself. Do you both need to be in the same headspace when writing vocals together or singing together live? Do you both need to be in the same headspace emotionally in order to make the song sound consistent? Or is it better if you're off in your different worlds and that maybe adds like contrast to the actual song?
Do you mean live?
Yeah, live or in the studio.
Hmm. I think that because of the writing of the song together, and when you rehearse it and you sing your part, or you play your part or whatever, you kind of go into that mindset anyways because of what you're singing, or you remember when it was written, that kind of thing. Like, I think you just, by default of playing and singing the song, you become, I mean, at least I think you come into the same headspace,
Yeah.
I would imagine. I don't know, I'll have to ask Brian.
Depending on how the song or what the song is about too, if it's something more personal or if it's something more rebellious or external in a way, internal versus external, depending on what the song is about, does it maybe resonate with you differently, or does it maybe do you feel like you channel a different energy into that song depending on the context of it, or in the end a song is a song and you don't really think about that too much?
Yeah, no, there's definite differences. Like, when, like you said, luckily we can span the spectrum of emotion with this band, and yeah, there's a few songs like All the Same, for example, or Odd One, where you do feel into that emotion, and you absolutely go into it. And then on the other side of the spectrum, like You're Going Down, or some of the other heavy ones, the aggressive ones, yeah, you most definitely, it sort of takes you on a journey, because by default of playing them, you kind of go into them. At least I feel like I do.
Being that you've also have been playing with Evanescence as well, which I feel like there are different styles. Definitely same audiences, definitely crossovers, but like Evanescence is very symphonic and there's a lot of epic elements. It's very cinematic. Sick Puppies is raw and like has like a dirty, sort of like down and dirty, no explanations needed vibe behind it. Is it a different mindset or technique or energy that you channel into different projects, or do you have sort of like a method behind the madness that it doesn't matter what project you're playing with, it sort of applies to everything?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something that I discovered myself too. Like, because you're absolutely right. Like, there is an absolute like dirty down to just aggressive energy with Sick Puppies, and then when I started playing with Evanescence, it was like a learning curve in a way of tempo and groove, something, because I was just so used to, like, as soon as we were on stage playing, it's that frenetic energy that came up, whereas that doesn't really serve Evanescence, and I had to sort of go, okay, just calm down a little bit, and fit into the groove. And that in and of it, I think it's just, yeah, by just, again, like with the songs, by default of what they are. But yeah, there's a different mindset. Like, I try not to, like, get into that like frenetic state, because you can't anyway, because the songs aren't like that. So luckily, like, it'll be like one tour at a time, so it won't be like, what I mean, so it'll be easier to slip into that mode. But yeah, it's really cool, with Evanescence, because it's like it's heavy, it's really heavy, but it's also really groovy at the same time. So yeah, it's a cool difference.
When you're playing material, not to discredit your role in Evanescence, but when you are playing the material that was written there before you joined versus playing material that you wrote, that you brought in, does it resonate with you differently when you play it live too? Do you have like maybe a different attachment to it in a way?
Definitely a different attachment, yeah. Like, because you remember when it was written and why and how it felt, and all of that is combined into playing that song. Like with Sick Puppies, for example, it is different, yeah, with Evanescence. But I think because their songs are super emotional as well, it's very easy to identify that and sort of feel that, especially if because I've known them for years, been a fan of them for years, and like I know some of the songs I knew really well, so it was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, I now that I'm playing it, I'm feeling it. Yeah, it's cool.
Um, Now, I want to go back with Sick Puppies because, again, the evolution is truly a force to be reckoned with. Like, I discovered Sick Puppies on Tripolar, but then would go back
Mm,
and dress up for life, dressed up as life, and Welcome to the Real
right.
World as I backtrack. The evolution is really something that's truly impressive. This is sort of like a debate I've been having with artists. Is evolution, as an artist, do you have control over that? Do you have control over your evolution and do you decide where that goes? Or does evolution just have to happen naturally and you can't really think about that too much?
Mm, I like that you're thinking about that. I think my natural instinct is to say that you can't help it because I think we're human beings and we're getting older as people, and you can't help but feel differently and think differently as the years go by. And so if you try and like write the same song, like it just doesn't feel right, kind of thing. You know, like back when you're 25 and you're writing something that was very relevant then, and a whole album, even two albums, whatever, and you try and do that again, like, you know, decade or two later, you can't because you're not in the same place. So I do think that it's just natural and you can't help it.
I've always wondered if it's like I've always loved those album anniversary tours where people perform an album front to back. They're always great. It's always great to experience, but no artist is ever the same person that they were when they first wrote that. So part of me I
Yeah.
don't want to say does it lose like is it disingenuous when they play that anymore? But like part of me wonders like the whole idea like this album brings me back. Like this is bringing me back to the old days. I'm like, is it really bringing you back? Like they look much
Right,
older
right.
now than they did back then. So
I think that that there is a definite element because it's kind of like, you know, when you look at photos or videos of back in the day and you get transported, you feel a little melancholy and you're like, oh, I remember those days, kind of thing. It's probably a little bit of that, and it's in you anyway. You're the one that wrote it and you've been playing it for years, so you kind of revisit that part of yourself that kind of wrote that, I guess, when you play it. So I don't know. I think it's really cool because it's like, you know how, you know, everything is transient, everything must end. And I used to have a hard time with it with bands where I'm like, I really love their first and second album. They started to evolve. Like, for example, I love Silverchair, and they started to evolve so rapidly, in my opinion, with each album. And I was like, no, I'm still not done with the style of the first two or three. And but now I realize you can't. You just have to appreciate it at the time for what it was, and then you have to move on because you can't force like going back there. But I think, yeah, when you play greatest hits or whatever, or we do like one of those anniversary tours, which I think are really awesome. I saw Horn do that recently. It was really cool. You just revisit that part of yourself that wrote that, and it's cool.
I cannot wait for the My Chemical Romance Black Parade
Oh
anniversary
yeah,
tour.
me too.
So
Me
like
too.
I'm gonna be I got my ticket and I'm not missing that for
Oh,
anything.
which one are you going to?
The New Jersey one in MetLife.
Awesome,
Yep,
awesome. I know I'm a big fan too.
I got so lucky with that ticket if I was a half a second later. But
Nice.
and
It
I have
was meant to be.
yeah, right. That'll be my fifth time seeing them too. So I saw them
Oh,
four times
nice.
on the reunion. But I got a
Yeah.
few more questions for you if you got a few more minutes. But
Yeah, yeah.
this is sort of a similar question about the evolution, but it's about inspiration. Do you believe inspiration is something you could seek out and go looking for it, or do you just have to let artistic inspiration try to strike you? And the reason why I asked that is because I had a conversation with one of my tattoo artists one time, and she said that if I only tattooed when I was inspired, I wouldn't pay my rent. So, like, inspiration I've always thought is good to have, but can you really rely on inspiration? Do you sometimes like I don't obviously it's not good to force anything, but sometimes you really do have to dig things out to really make it happen, you know? Maybe that is why it's good when maybe a label or a manager or something sort of like lights a fire underneath you, right?
Yeah, I am of that school of thought too, and I think that maybe back in the day, like when it's because, like you said, like your tattoo artist said, like she wouldn't be able, or he wouldn't be able to pay the rent. It's kind of like when you mix like writing an art or whatever with something that needs to be done, like it needs to be written, or a label is asking, like you said, or a manager is asking for it, and there's something pulling you along that's not just, I want to just create something. It does cause that tension, and I think you're absolutely right about that. And I've seen this before, and I've heard this before too. Is that you have to like if it hits, great, take advantage of it, write it down, write the song, or paint the painting or whatever. But also, like, if you really want to keep doing it, I guess it's just set aside some time in that day or whatever time frame you have, and actually sit down to write the book or write the song. And it might be really frustrating when there's no inspiration, but there have been times, actually, even with Sick Puppies, where we've been sitting there, and I mean, it was like all friggin' day, and it was frustrating because it's like this is really difficult. This is like nothing is hitting, and we're not really inspired. But at the end of the day, we did kind of like bang out a song, and it was pretty good. Like, I was like, oh, I'm surprised. I always thought that it was either there or it wasn't, but I think that it's true. You have to just sit down and allow yourself to either do it or not do it. You never know what's going to, show up.
And on top of that too, replicating this material that you wrote live, because I've seen you Sick Puppies twice now. The first time was 10 years ago with Lacuna Coil at Irving Plaza. Fantastic show.
Oh, yeah, nice.
February of 2014. And then the most recent time I saw you was in 2019 at Louder Than Life Festival. Great time.
Oh, cool.
You really know how to bring a live energy and really just capture that moment. But when you're writing this song, and I've been in recording studios before, it's very static, it's very controlled and confined. Like, I like recording studios, but I'll just say, to me, I don't find them a pleasant place to write in or to get inspired in. It's freezing cold in there. It feels like it's like a doctor's office with compressors and mixers around.
Right.
So like,
because they have to keep the equipment cool.
Yeah, I know. I've held rack gear right when it was fresh being used, and it's like touching an iron. But especially with the exposed tubes and all that. But
right.
Yeah. But how do you take that emotional energy in a static place like a vocal booth or recording studio, and how are you able to replicate that live where there is a lot of energy and atmosphere and all that?
I think that it's in the writing process. Like, by the time you get to the recording, like when you're recording it, I want to hope that it's all written, because it's true. Writing it in, I guess, like a studio where you got the pressure of like, oh, now we got to record, is a little, I don't know, we haven't really done it that way, but I think it's when you write it, whether it's whoever you write it with, or if you write it together in a band room together, that's where the energy sort of gets put into the parts and the song and everything. But then I think there's a lot of production stuff that can happen in the studio too that gives it a cool energy as well. So it's a very different process, I think, like writing it and then recording it with the production and then doing it live. I feel like it's three different mindsets, three different processes, and the most fun for me is translating it into live. Some songs it's weird because like you'll write something, you're like, oh, love this song, and then for some reason you try and do it live and it's just not the same. That has happened before, luckily not too often, but it's different.
And do you almost have to practice crowd interaction or stage presence in a way?
Yeah, well, that stuff comes naturally, I think, when you play a few shows and you realize what the crowd doesn't like. You can try a crowd interaction thing, most definitely, and see if it works. And sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it does. But in terms of like just the energy and the movement and the stage presence, I think that's like a natural thing.
Yeah.
That kind of happens over time with the song.
Yeah, I mean, every artist is shy at one point or another. I don't care how much of a hardcore kid you are too, like with all your circle pits and whatnot. We were all shy on our first show at one point or another.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Do you think also with Sick Puppies versus Evanescence as well, that because you are the face of Sick Puppies in my eye, and like it's your baby, and you're singing together with these two other musicians who are incredible, but you are at the forefront. Whereas for Evanescence, again, like Amy is moving around all the time, and like it's like she's sort of like the face of her band and whatnot. And again, not discrediting the role, but like being more in the
Oh no,
sort
of
of
course.
being more sort of in the background. Does that also maybe did you have to maybe adjust your stage presence with that as well?
Yeah, it's true. Like with Sick Puppies, it's a three piece, so it's like everyone tries to. It's hard to fill up that space when there's only two people up front. Mark's in the back, has to sit down. But like, there was a mindset. Okay, let's. There's a lot of room here to play with. It was an adjustment because there wasn't a lot of room to play with. I was like, oh, okay, because a lot of my energy comes from nervous energy, and I have to move, and that I have to like whether it's whatever it is, movement on stage. So I that was an adjustment because I was like, okay, I don't want to. That's not the same thing. I don't have to cover, all this ground. There's so many other people, and there's Amy at the front who, covers all of that ground, and that's and sort of like it was a mindset shift. I was like, okay, I can like kind of lay back a little bit and be a bit more dynamic with the show, which was cool. It was a learning experience.
Yeah,
I liked it.
100%. We're always learning. So,
Yeah.
before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time and for such an awesome conversation. And most of all, thank you for your music for all these years and bringing it to us. That continues to inspire us. Is there just anything else with Sick Puppies or Evanescence that you would like to promote? Wave the Bull is coming out in 2025. Definitely a very anticipated album for this year for me. I'm super excited for it. Just so what else can we be expecting from Sick Puppies in the near future, if you're allowed to say, of course, at this very moment?
First of all, thank you. I really appreciate that. And thanks for having me. This was a really cool interview. Um, I guess no, just the album. Yeah, Wave the Ball coming out early next year, and we'll have some more singles coming out before that. And just to watch the socials, both bands, and yeah, that's
Yeah.
about it.
I know that there's probably a tour that's been booked and everything. You just can't announce it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
there's a couple of festivals that have been announced. I think, but as for the tours, yeah, we haven't announced anything like
yeah.
that as yet.
Yeah.
But just keep checking the socials.
But thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Sick Puppies, Wave the Ball 2025. Pick it up. We'll see you next time on Heavy New York.